All right, so let's see what we got for today. So last week I wasn't here, so I need to dig a little bit into my memory. Right, default activity inputs. We can talk about that. Plugin API updates, I don't remember, but maybe I'll remember when we look at the code. And more recently, I've been working on the new dashboard, so that's going to be fun to talk about. So let's start with the default activity inputs. Let me just show you what it looks like, and then it becomes a little bit more clear. All right, so this is the old studio. This is the new studio. So I changed my screen resolution so everything is out of whack. So let me see if I can figure out where's what. So this is this is the solution explorer, code editor. This is the server. All right, so let me see if I can start this. All right, so let me create a new workflow definition. So I might have lowered my screen resolution a little bit too much, because this, I think, is the bottom panel and it extends all the way to the top. So I don't think I can decrease it in size because it's overlapping the screen resolution. So let me see if I can change it. Okay, it's a little bit blurry now, but I hope the recording captured this okay. All right, so an enhancement that was made is default values. So the API already allows you to configure your activity properties with default values, but it wasn't actually honored in the designer, and that's been fixed. So let's see if I can find an example. Oh, this is really sad that it's so blurry, but at least it's readable, right? All right. Okay, great. So here, for example, we have the send HTTP request, which is configured, which has a method property, and now it's configured to use the get value by default. So if we use this one in the designer, then we should see the method being set to get by default. Of course, in this case, it would have already been set to get because it's the first item. So maybe that's not the greatest example to show that it works. Let's see if I have another one. Or maybe I'll just change this to delete for now. Oops, I already have a server running on this port, so let me close one of them. So either I didn't do a good job and I didn't test it properly, or maybe the build is using a cast binary. So let me just make sure and just rebuild this one. And to be clear, it's entirely possible. It's the first reason. It wouldn't be the first time.
Still in holiday mode.
Come again?
They're still in the holiday mode, maybe.
Yeah, I'm very relaxed. All right, so, and then let's also rebuild the main project just for good measure. Oh, okay, so it was briefly put to delete and then it's shifted to get. So maybe there's a bug with this drop-down list component. Okay, so now it's shifted to delete somehow. That's so interesting. Let me try again. Let me refresh. Well, something's funky going on here, so I'll take another look at this after the call. But in principle, it should work after I fix this little issue. So that's some work that's been done. Plugin API updates. So maybe we can take a look at that. If we go to the stencil project. Oh yeah, I think I remember. So it has to do with plugins. And let's see if we can find something from index.html. Right, so when you create plugins for the designer using stencil ideally, or using JavaScript in this case, which supports the class keyword, you just create a class, implement the initialize method, and then you can use the various services that are exported by the designer module, such as the container, which is same as the service container in, or similar in concept to the .NET service collection. You get Studio Service and a few more services that help you to interact with the designer and the components within that. And also services are accessible to you. For example, here is a simple example that changes the the naming strategy for creating activity names. So here it's set to Pascal case strategy, but there's a few others. And here I demonstrate how to install this custom plugin using the initializing event of the shell component, which is this component here. So by listening to this event, I get access to the plugin registry from where you can then add and even replace components. So or plugins, each plugin has a name. And if you wanted to replace a plugin, for example, the default login component presents a login screen, but maybe you don't want to use the default identities module of Elsa, but replace it with your own identity provider or maybe Auth0 or whatever else. In which case you will have created your own plugin, and then here you can replace it with your custom plugin so that it's not going to display the home login screen anymore, but instead perform the actions that are necessary for authenticating with Auth0 in this example. So some work has been done there, but since we are on the topic of this UI, and specifically the topic of plugins for this UI, it's as you know, it's you need to create either stencil components or use JavaScript. If you come from a .NET Core or .NET background, it's not very pleasant or convenient, and not to mention that this component model is not as elegant, I think. Yeah, of course, this is highly subjective, but I think the Blazor component model is much more elegant and easy to extend with custom NuGet packages. So I always wanted to recreate the front end using Blazor in the form of an extensible modular dashboard application framework. And that's what I've started to do a couple of days ago as an experiment. And that's what I would like to show next. But it's very bare bones still. It's really experimental. But what I'm leading towards to is using this project called Mod Blazor, which is it's a terrific Blazor component library that implements material design in a very easy to use set of components that you can, construct your UI with. So this is their homepage. I think even their homepage is created using their own library. And here's a, a bit of a preview of what you could do with these components. And it's perfect for what I want to do with the dashboard application, because it's going to be a dashboard application with an extensible menu. And of course, main content area, which would present the designer for one thing, but also a separate list of workflow definitions, workflow instances, and of course, if you create your own modules, maybe you're creating an admin area for managing customers that you want to connect to workflows. You could install your own modules there and then use the dashboard for managing that stuff if you want to. Other than custom modules, I want to provide some other general purpose modules, like maybe managing or having analytics that you can install, but it should be optional. And maybe there will be a webhooks module where you want to configure webhooks, and there's a lot of other things that you can think of, including user management, role management, and of course maybe even email templates that you want to manage from the dashboard. So those are all ideas for add-on modules that would then be manageable through the UI. And the nice thing is this would all be implemented using C# and using Blazor. Here I'm experimenting with an initial setup. So this consists of a left menu here. This menu is extensible, so each module can contribute to this menu by implementing some interface. So for example, here we have a counter and the way that looks. So this is the Elsa dashboard solution, and it consists of a few main folders. I'll just explain briefly the current structure. It all starts at the root, which is the host application. So you can choose to either use Blazor Server or Blazor WebAssembly. Both targets work well. And of course, with .NET 8 coming out later this year, there should be the option to use this hybrid mode. I don't know what they call it, or mixed mode, where you can mix and match components that are rendered on the server, but also on the client. Maybe the initial rendering happens server side, and then it bootstraps on the client side where it comes live using WebAssembly. So that's going to be pretty cool. But that's where it starts. So either server or WebAssembly for now. And they both reference the shell. And the shell is basically, it's an empty shell that it's like the shared UI library. So it just contains the app raiser, which contains the router for navigation. And that's the main idea. And then the modules you reference directly from your main application. And one such module is the counter module, just as a proof of concept to see if we can have separate Razor class libraries, because that's what this is. It's just a Razor class library, which exposes pages, components, and of course a menu. And the menu here, it just implements iMenu provider, where you return a list of menu items, which is just a DTO, and then you can control the icon, the path to the page that you want to display when the user clicks on the menu item, etc. It even supports submenus, as you can see here. So there's submenu item 1 and 2, which translate to these two items here. So yeah, in MudBlazer, it has a lot of components, and this is, I'm just scratching the surface here, but of course it has very important, the light mode and the dark mode. And in terms of polishing the UI, that's gonna be done later. For now, it's more of a technical proof of concept. The most work is going to be re-implementing the designer service itself in a way that it's reusable. So right now it's implemented in Stencil here. So this area in the center, that's built using Stencil, which uses the X6 library, but it was done in a way right now where it's supposed to be reusable, but I took a few shortcuts where that causes it to be tightly coupled with other aspects of the surroundings and other notions that can be done differently in a more decoupled fashion, so that it could be truly reusable. So if you want to create a custom dashboard, for example, with your own menu, and you wanted to go to a workflow definition editor, right now it wouldn't work because there's too many other dependencies. And of course I can go in and decouple those things and untangle all of that. But since I want to move to a Blazor implementation anyway, that becomes reusable, I'm probably gonna jump ahead and do that right away. And once that's done, then the component will be reusable as a proper web component to reuse in your own library. But then it's nicely isolated and has a proper API service to interact with it. But it's a little bit of a dilemma that I'm dealing with, also with the upcoming release candidate date that's been set to be the end of this month. But yeah, so it's experimental. I don't expect this to be done not this month for sure. Next month is more reasonable, but we will see how fast it goes.
And the idea is to get the same interface contract with the API and the server, and only be able to switch from the Stencil dashboard to the .NET dashboard.
Yeah, exactly. So the server side remains untouched. So it's the same workflow server with the same REST API endpoints, but there will be two clients. So you can choose to use this UI, which consumes the same REST API, or the Blazor dashboard, which has navigation and separate screens, but they all talk to the same API. So it's still a separate project.
So we will continue to maintain two dashboards.
I think ultimately this dashboard will deprecate this one, because this is not really a dashboard. It's just a little designer here with two panels. Yeah, exactly. And of course, there's this toolbar here, but it's which contains some menu buttons. But it's deliberately not designed to be a dashboard, because I wanted to do that properly in Blazor. So this is here right now for getting started quickly. Yeah, but my thinking is to deprecate this once we have an extensible dashboard that is on par in terms of features with what we have right now in Stencil. And once we have that, then I wouldn't invest in this thing Like for instance, having user and role management, I wouldn't create those plugins here.
Okay, so and the idea is to be able to take only necessary module for external developer to incorporate the designer or the workflow instance or anything else in our specific application.
Exactly. Yeah, indeed, because that's still an important requirement that you can take these components and use it in your own dashboard application, which also means that the designer itself, that's going to be embedded here. So this area will not take any dependencies on Mud Blazor or anything like that. That's just going to have its own CSS that is scoped and themable. You should still be able to override the styling if you wanted to in certain areas. Yeah, at the same time, I am wondering what to do, for example, with these panels here. So these panels here and this panel would be nice to use Mud Blazor. So that, but it becomes, they still should become reusable components, and you can then take them into your own dashboard application. But because it's using Mud Blazor, which supports themes, probably you can still customize it, although I'm at this point not sure how it interacts with the theme manager, which is like a global singleton component that's used, and all of the components feed from that. So I'm not entirely sure in that respect.
Yeah, but maybe they could we could have some hook or some endpoint to customize the theme for each component. I understand it.
Yeah.
And the designer part will always be X6, or it will also be another thing and in .NET.
Yeah, so I know there's a .NET library, but it seems to be, well, not maintained as of recent that I could see. But and also I'm not too sure about its feature set. So I think it's maintained by one person. It's been a while since I've seen a recent commit, and I'm not sure if it contains all of the features that I want for the designer. So my plan is for now to re-implement, continue using X6, which is now at version 3, I think, or version 2, which is a newer major version than what's being used right now here. So this uses 1 point something, but they have 2.x. So
Yeah.
Elsa 3 currently uses this one, but I want to use this version here, and then using JS interrupt to communicate with the component. And that's what I just started experimenting with. So what you see here is X6.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
but I always struggle with UI layout.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you see the scroll bars here. It's just
it's always the same for me. It's a
yeah,
pain.
it is a pain always. But here it's more or less figured out, but in a not so elegant fashion, I think, with the panels. I mean, it's from a user perspective, it looks great, but if you know what it takes to implement, the how everything needs to be orchestrated together with, for example, the center area needs to know about the width of this panel. So whenever you collapse a panel, which the width now becomes 0, but that also then updates the width of this center area so that it jumps to the right. It works great, but I don't like the implementation. It's not very generic, I would say. It's very tailor-made, which I hate. So I'm hoping that with X6 and some front-end designer that I'm gonna look for to do it in a proper way.
Okay. And for the CSS, NetBlazor, you will use Tailwind or not?
No, so for CSS, for the dashboard area, so the surrounding area, I'll be using Mud Blazor. So Mud Blazor implements material design, and it also brings CSS classes that implement this material design. And that's very convenient because it allows you to do things like this, where you can switch themes between dark mode and light mode, and they have a very elegant theming API. So I'll just show you for a brief second.
Okay.
So let's see. All right, so here we have the main layout. So it has a menu theme provider, and here they just have a property as dark mode that you can set to true or false. So very easy to change. And then the theme itself is set to an object called current theme, which comes from my own theme service. So here I have a class library that modules would reference so that they can consume services like the theme service, which allows application developers to modify the current theme or even replace the current theme with their own theme. And a theme is just an object called mud theme. And I will show you what that looks like. So I have an implementation of iTheme service, which creates a default theme. And here I'm just constructing my own theme. If you create a new mud theme object, it will have certain defaults. And then I'm just changing some aspects of the default theme here. But it's a new object, so it's not affecting anything default. I'm just using this object here. And if you want, you can just instantiate your own mud theme instance if you object and then assign it to this property here, and it will fire this event and then it will just update everything here. But it's very nice. So they have a palette with colors for things like the app bar, the drawer background, and that's the beauty of having a design system like material design. There's these known objects or concepts or right, and then you can just change the colors. And there are more aspects that you can do: shadows, typography, other stuff that you can change. So it's great because now we automatically have a way for applications to completely change the UI. To the extent that it's supported. You will still have to deal with this left menu because that's encoded in the Blazor components, of course, but things like the logo and the title, we could expose as a API service so that the application implementer can change it if they want. And that's the nice thing about Blazor. It's just so much easier to expose these aspects for customization and even replacement versus with Stencil and JavaScript in general. It's of course possible. It's just not as convenient to me, at least. So let me show you WASM as well, just for a second. So as you can see, it looks exactly the same, which is pretty cool. So you can just run it in WebAssembly. So yeah, there's a few things, as I mentioned, that I'm figuring out. Once that's figured out, I should be able to move pretty fast and basically replicate this stuff here, but in Blazor. And then it's also a reusable component. And I'm also considering maybe to update the UI a little bit of the activities themselves. So based on what I've seen here. So maybe, more subtle coloring here. Have you guys ever heard of Retool? So I've never used it, but somebody pointed me to it, and it looks really good. So, and what they are doing here is that each activity on their workflow also contains the settings for the workflow. Look at this. Can you guys hear this?
No.
This is the opposite of low code environment.
There's a lot of coding for sure, and so it looks like it targets developers because your normal users aren't going to write this. But I think it might be an interesting idea to consider having activity input directly on the activities, and of course being able to collapse the view if you want to have a bit of space. And one other thing, I wonder if this engine also supports long-running workflows where maybe it gets suspended and then wait for user input so that you can resume the workflow. I haven't really delved into it, so I don't know.
But one cool feature is the ability to test each activity one after other.
Yeah, exactly. Like they have these play buttons, right? And then it executes the activity. In this case, it returns all of the queries, which is really nice. And I also like that you can add new activities just by dragging, out of this circle and then releasing the mouse, and it prompts you to select the next activity type, or they call it workflow blocks. That's really good. So maybe we can get some inspiration from this tool.
Yeah, the UI looks nice, and the way that you can preview the results, it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like this. So I'm gonna explore this some more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it looks really great. All right, so I think that's my update for now. I don't know if you guys have anything else to share or topics to discuss.
No specific topic on my side. I just want to
I just-
work telemetry on open telemetry, but just read some elements, but I don't have a dig into it already.
Nice. Yeah, that's and you want to implement open telemetry for Elsa 2 or for Elsa 3?
For Elsa 3.
Yeah, that's going to be very helpful for troubleshooting.
I just have one small observation or feedback that we encountered today with Elsa 2. So we had our own custom activity provider, and so far it was working great without any issue. But we did some updates in the system, and it was throwing an exception. And what we have noticed is because that one single provider was throwing an exception, it affected all the activities. So the API endpoint that lists down all the activities stopped working anymore. Basically, the exception propagated all the way up, so it wasn't captured. So in that scenario, maybe it's a matter of just exception handling, not to let one bad actor affect the rest of the system, is to be able to capture these exceptions by the system and not let it ruin the rest of the activity.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when the activity manager service or the activity type service or whatever manager class is invoking these providers, it should do it within it should do so in a try-catch, so that if one provider fails, it doesn't break everything else. Yeah, that makes sense. And then of
I
course
was
it could
doing
be
one
up.
demo to a customer and suddenly things stopped working. So it was a little bit of a, you know.
Yeah, I can imagine that scenario.
Yeah. So some bit of hardening or robustness may be required for, especially when you are depending on a third party or an external provider, that things could go wrong at any time, and the rest of the system should not be affected by that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Was this Elsa 2 or Elsa 3?
It was an Elsa 2,
Mm.
and probably it is something that we can fix, but also for Elsa 3 also, we need to consider that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we have you test these things out and let us know where it needs to be improved.
Exactly.
Nice. Did I mention the updates on the documentation? I've done also a lot of work on the documentation here. So I think last time I showed some of the guides. I don't know if I think I actually walked through the external app integration, which shows off the run task activities and how to integrate it via webhooks with external applications. In this example, modeling a simplified process called employee onboarding. So if you have a new employee, you want to onboard it in your company, you want to create an email account. So that's this step. And then once that's done, all the other tasks will execute as well. But these tasks are executed by the external application. That's the point here. So basically using Elsa as a orchestrator or a conductor. It's a different term. Also loading workflows from JSON, that's added. So it talks about the so here it shows how to do it just bare bones using, loading JSON from a file and then deserializing it into a workflow and then executing it. Nice. And then here it talks about the workflow definition provider. And there's a new one called Fluent Storage workflow definition provider, which leverages Fluent Storage, which is a library that basically abstracts file access, and it has different providers like, of course, file system, but also FTP, Azure Blob Storage, and that sort of thing. And here I show how to configure it, and then you can just store JSON files in your workflows folder, and it will automatically be available to the system, just like in Elsa 2. Although in Elsa 2 it uses not Fluent Storage, but I forgot the name. I think storage.net, but that project has been archived, and this is the, well, I consider this one the replacement. And a nice contribution from a customer. One of their developers created a section on invoking workflows programmatically, but also from the designer. Here's some information also about using the REST API and using C# code. For concepts, there's some more information here about workflow, activity, input, output. And this is of the activity library. It's more of a skeleton at this moment, but I did start writing about the HTTP activities, and I'm still trying to figure out a good way to present it. So this is an experiment where I start with a table of the activities within a given category and then going into the details. But I'm also thinking that maybe it's a little bit too much information all at once. So maybe I'll remove this table and just, because we also have this on this page section here. So maybe it's not necessary to have a table.
Can it be automatically generated from the class definition?
You mean the table or the on this page?
Yeah, no, the table for activity input and output.
Activity input and output?
This
Sorry.
is the activity listed. Huh? Oh, okay. I thought this is the input and output.
Oh no, so no input output here. This is more of a general description of this concept in Elsa, input and output, and then it goes and shows an example of what input looks like and how to do output. But this is the activity library, so this describes the individual activities and how you can, well, the properties, what they mean, and an example. Custom activity section, which of course is important. If you want to extend Elsa with your own activities, then you need to understand how that works. And this is an initial version. There should also be another page that explains how to create blocking activities and triggers. And I think if that's there, of course, there's still a host of other things you want to document, like how to use the identity module or replace it with your own authentication mechanism. But that has to come a little bit later. And JavaScript expressions and Liquid has been added. So it's a small start. All right. Yeah, so that's what I have for now. I will continue working on the dashboard, mostly wrapping the designer into, exposed or implemented by X6 and then wrapping it in a Blazor component so that's reusable. And hopefully it's not going to be too much work because once that's done, then I think we can pretty quickly migrate over to the new dashboard and deprecate this one.
Quick question: Do you commit this on a specific branch?
The dashboard, you mean? So it is its own repository. Let's find it here. Not this one, but it's Elsa dashboard. So this is the repo.
Okay.
And I'm pushing directly to the main branch, so it doesn't have any feature branches yet.
I think I will start to look at this as app.
Cool. Yeah, that would be great. All right, then I thank you for joining, and I will catch you next week.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.